Hey, we're here today with Jessica Hoag at the Citrus Hospice Care Center to ask her a couple of questions about how she arrived at being a hospice nurse and what she enjoys the most and is most rewarding for her. Hi, Jessica.
Hi there.
Now, can you start and talk a little bit about why you became a hospice nurse?
Well, I became a nurse about almost 10 years ago, and I've had kind of a varying career. That's one of the reasons I love being a nurse, is because you can always change things up if you want to broaden yourself or learn a different skill set. You always have the opportunity to do so. And so I started, of course, getting my feet wet on the hospital floor, and then transitioned to a hospice. And what I found in that experience there was that type hospice nursing is the most reciprocal nursing that you will ever find. I've shared with people that when I was a child, I always loved when the missionaries would come to church because it always was fascinating to me, and the stories that they would tell about people being helped by their services, and how grateful they were for basic things that we kind of take for granted every day, for
Sure.
Band-Aids. And I found in the curative realm of things in the hospitals, and a lot of it's patient after patient after patient. It's quick, and pass these meds, and I was losing the education piece, because that's I love to teach, and so you didn't have the time for that. And then I found with hospice that I was actually able to come into a family's life at a time where they're in the most a very receptive stage of things, because they're seeking guidance and they're seeking support, and they want the knowledge to be able to navigate this unknown. And so I just felt such purpose and place when I started working for hospice.
What do you do when families give you some pushback as far as having that patient go on board and become a hospice patient?
It's difficult because everybody comes to the table, and I'll talk to my families that I'm jumping into a dynamic that could have been in the making for 40, 50, 60 years. So I'm just kind of coming into all of this, so I have to learn very quickly. And sometimes, it's hard because people don't warm up to you. I'm a stranger, and they're going through a very emotional, stress-filled time sometimes. And oftentimes, one of the biggest things is that's what I'm on the phone all the time. I should attach it to my head, because they're seeking that information. And then sometimes if there is, miscommunication, or they misunderstood, or maybe they have had some misinformation out in the community, even, because there's a lot of misinformation out there about hospice and about what it means to be on hospice. And so sometimes it's really just a lot of seeking to understand where they're at, and then meeting them there and saying, well, this is the direction that we're trying to get in, and which, for hospice, it's quality of life and comfort.
Do you find that a lot of patients and families just make the assumption that hospice is just and strictly just about hospice management? How would you dispel that myth?
A lot of it, because what I hear oftentimes is people, I came onto hospice and I'm ready, or I've been put in hospice, so my time is up. And a lot of times when I hear those things, I talk to my patient, to the family, and said, this person is here for a purpose. So I don't know what it is, and sometimes the person doesn't even know what it is, but I have to, when that comes up, because it's hard. I mean, you're talking about, you're at the end of a life, and you're kind of this culmination of a life's work sometimes, and sometimes they're ready and ready to transition to the next step, and then sometimes they're not, and you have to figure out where they're at in that continuum of things. I mean, it's really I think I should go back and get my psychology degree in some respects. But once you can touch into that and learn about that, that's when I can kind of help mold the conversations that I'm having with them to get them to where they need to be, or to a better understanding. Because, you know, a lot of times it is, well, you're just going to give me a bunch of pain medicine. That's, you know, or I don't want to do the pain medicine until right at the very end, because, you know, I've heard about, you know, I had a neighbor down the street that they started that morphine, and, you know, they were gone within, you know, 2 hours. And so it's really talking to them and saying, you know what, this is your journey. This is individualized to you. I can't cookie cutter anything with my patients. So you say, this is our plan of care. I said, if you want, you know, if this is how you want your symptoms managed, you know, that's what I'm here for, is to ensure that that happens. I get to be that advocate for them. And so once I kind of get that into the conversation, that, you know, you call me or you call hospice, and we'll make sure that everyone's on page and on point with the plan. A lot of times that's when, you know, it starts to transition into change.
And what do you find most rewarding about being a hospice nurse?
A lot of things, and I think
you can name as many as you want.
Start a list. Begin with A. No, I've always enjoyed being a nurse because I've always liked caring for people. And when I was little, I was fortunate enough to have great grandparents, and even still have a great grandmother who's 97. Wow. And so I went through, as you know, a young child, and I was in nursing homes, and I was around people who were ill, and so it wasn't foreign to me, because I mean, in my adulthood, I've met, you know, adults who I've never even been to a funeral, and I'm like, how is that possible? But, you know, some people, it's, you know, it's taboo almost. You don't talk about it, and I don't want to see it, and I don't want to be a part of it. And so I found a niche with hospice, because because sometimes most people, when I say, well, what do you do? And I'm a hospice nurse, and they're like, oh, you know, usually I get this really distorted face, like, oh man, that must really stink, you know. And I'm like, no, I really love it, you know. And then, you know, of course, then the questions are like, how do you love something, you know, where most people are so sad? And I'm like, I get to, you know, our geriatric population, they might as well have grown up on a different planet to what we experience today. So to get to talk to them, or to listen to them, or to, you know, have a moment with them where they're telling me about something of the past is, it's fleeting, it's going away. I mean, it is, you know, so that's something that I love hearing about. And it's teaching to me too, because I'm able to, I share with patients sometimes. I said, when I've had a difficult patient, when I have had, you know, to seek information, because I either, you know, me and a doctor were collaborating and I kind of felt differently, and I had to say, well, I need to get some foundation here so that I can, you know, I can either get on point with him, or we can move in a better direction for the patient, to educate myself. So hospice, because of that, and because I have a lot of autonomy, because I'm in the homes, challenges me as a nurse, and it hones my skills as a nurse. And I always love to grow. I am that lifelong learner that, you know, will always want to take a class here or learn about that, just to be better at it. And, you know, they always say the best way to, you know, learn something is to have to teach it. And so I'm on point and on stage every time I go into a home sometimes. And I am not the be all end all, and I don't know it all, but it's definitely, I gotta phone a friend as soon as I can, and, you know, or try to find the resources for them. So there's, like I said, there's so many different dynamics of it that I enjoy that, you know, it's hard to pinpoint even a couple.
Okay, you talked about learning. What kind of specialized training do you need to be a hospice nurse?
Well, going back to that psychology degree, you kind of have to have, I mean, it's great to have an understanding kind of, or maybe just an empathetic ear. Well, you can start there. Because like I said, you're coming into a situation where there could be estrangement, where the family doesn't know the person that well. You know, they just kind of showed up because, you know, it's what you're supposed to do is to be there at the end of life. You know, or, you know, there can be some dynamics that you yourself are just totally foreign with, because you've never experienced it. You never talked about it with a girlfriend, or, you know, that their experience. So you kind of have to be able to seek to understand in those situations and to have a lot of empathy. And the other thing too is, because I'm trying myself to get a special credentialing as a certified hospice and palliative care nurse, just to, I mean, I want that myself because, like I said, I'm not the be-all end-all. I don't know everything there is to know, and it is a specialized skill that we're providing, and you know, you can always try to improve at it and be better. Is just going to make me better for my next patient. So that's a credentialing out there. And so the other thing too, because we see, because of the population that we serve in most cases, is the older population who's receiving, you know, their skin is thin, or they're, you know, at risk for pressure breakdown, skin pressure breakdown, wounds, things like that, to be able to assess wounds and to treat them in a person who's probably not getting the best intake because maybe they're nauseous, or they're, you know, they're not, they just don't have an interest in food anymore. And so how do you heal something when you really essentially need to heal it from the inside out if they're not getting the building blocks they need? So it's challenging. So things like that, to, you know, to have a good foundation in like wound care, and you know, that's beneficial too, or has been. And like I said, that's one of the areas too that I've challenged myself to learn more, because you have to think outside of the box, because you know they're not on the high protein best diet and, you know, fully exercising and all this, so you kind of have to adapt.
And what skills do you use on a day-to-day basis, would you say, as a hospice nurse?
All of them. No, that's why I'm unspent at the end of the day, because really it's a flexibility, because my schedule, I will try to schedule something first thing in the morning with a patient, and I swear every time I always am calling that patient saying, I'm so sorry, you know, I'm on my way, or I'm, you know, in 30 minutes, because it's always changing. Because, you know, if I get a patient that's in crisis, you know, my patient that I'm just seeing for a routine visit, while all my patients are my priority, you know, it's an acute issue. I have to get to that person as soon as possible, because, you know, they may not be here in the next few moments. So you know, and I have a family going through something, so it's really, I have to be able to be very flexible in my day, and very apologetic at times because of, you know, just having to shuffle. But honestly, I don't think I've ever had a situation where a patient was like, you know, you didn't show up at 9:05, and, you know, but as long as it's a communication thing too, and that's huge also, is just to be able to communicate, not, you know, their expectation, but to be able to understand that where their need is at. Because, you know, I can be, well, why are they so upset? I mean, you know, it's just, you know, 10 minutes, you know, or but they were expecting, you know, they're waiting for you. And like I said, and a lot of times they're seeking that you out, and you don't find that in other realms of nursing so much, I don't think. Maybe in the acute need, when you know, need CPR, you're seeking that out if you actively need it, you know. But as far as the teaching and the understanding of it, sometimes I think you won't find it anywhere else, as, you know, in such genuinely appreciated need as in hospice.
Now, you talked already about what you find is most rewarding about hospice, being a hospice nurse. What would you say is the most frustrating, or the point in the care that you provide that might keep you up at night?
It's so funny, because I was thinking, man, that's going to be one of those tough questions, but actually it just like came to me. But it's really hard as a nurse, especially when you go through nursing school, because as the traditional training is on the curative side of things. You're treating a patient, you have goals and a care plan and things set to the betterment of the patient as far as a improved outcome. You know, if it's a wound, it's, you know, the wound heals completely, or, you know, if it's pain, it's complete pain resolution, you know. It's very hard sometimes, because that was your foundation, to kind of have to switch gears and say, our goals are different in hospice. It's not, we're not seeking a cure. we're seeking quality and comfort. And so what does that look like for the patient? So I really have to kind of put those needs in front of, my traditional education and say, what can I do to meet their needs? Because sometimes it's not that the wound will heal, but the wound will be free of infection. Maybe that's what my goal will be. And so, like I said, sometimes, we want to put a Band-Aid on it, and when we take that Band-Aid off, it's, good to go, and it's not always going to be that way. So that's difficult at times.
Now, it's pretty self-explanatory that what you do for patients as a hospice nurse, but can you talk a little bit about what additional care you provide or any additional resources that you provide for families and other loved ones and friends?
Sure.
How you can help in that respect as well.
A lot of times, I'm dealing with, I'm just trying to think of its percentage, but a lot of times in most situations, you're dealing with family, because sometimes the patient is, maybe they're too tired to, go through a whole, dissertation.
Yes, the lights did go out in here.
It's been too long. They're like, lights out. No, but are we still good?
Yep, we're still good.
Good. With the patient and the family, you're talking to the family a lot of times because they're the healthcare surrogate. They're the power of attorney. They're the decision maker. And that's a hard pill to swallow sometimes. And people sign those forms, and say, yes, I'm going to be your healthcare proxy. And then when, you're at the moment of decision and the weight of it is upon that person, it's a lot to have to deal with. So a lot of times with the families of the patient, it's a question. And I love the family that, there's a husband and wife, and maybe either the husband or the wife is the patient, and then they have 9 children, and every child is in a different place, and they have their own set of questions. And so we do the round table, a lot of times, and get that family member to be like, we already asked that question, but they weren't ready to hear it, or they weren't at that place of, of understanding with it. And so it can be interesting, especially, like I said, with the bigger families, to try to, to educate and to meet their needs. But a lot of times that's the big thing, the support to them there's no price tag to put on it, because the biggest thing, one of the biggest fears a lot of families have is the Monday through Friday fear, because, everything happens at Friday at 6, and everyone's closed at 5, or it's over the weekend. And so, it's such a relief to them to say, we're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you need to call us first. If there's an emergency, call us first. You don't have to, Google a number. You don't have to, figure out who should I call. Do I call this specialist, or do I call his primary care, or do I, you call us first. And, I try to tell them too, as, in the case management role, I said, let me take some of this off of you. And a lot of times I'm doing that with children, because they are, and adult children, I should say, because they have been, if it's a long prognosis like an Alzheimer's, dementia, I mean, they can 8-10 years they could have been navigating this. And so, if that person is nearing end of life, I will say to them, you let me do the caretaker role now. I said, it's time for you to be the daughter. It's time for you to be the son. Because you get in that train of thought, that track of, I've got pills and meds and appointments, and, they lose this is my, my mom or my dad. And I try to tell them, I said, I'm going to be very candid, because I wouldn't want it sugar-coated. I would want, the hard, cold facts with my patients, and if I was in their shoes, I want to know, because sometimes we have just moments. And so I try to tell them, and that's where I tell them, you need to be the daughter now. I said, I got it. You get to take that role. And sometimes that's kind of odd, but it's important to hear, because they lose sight of it a lot of times.